Before we talk about reality, we need to ask a more fundamental question. Not what reality is, but how anything begins at all. Imagine this. There is nothing to observe, nothing to compare, nothing to name, no objects, no time, no separation. Now ask yourself, how could anything ever appear from that? Because the moment something appears, there must already be distinction, difference, awareness. Something must know that something exists. And that leads to the first real problem. If awareness appears later, then it came from somewhere. And if it came from somewhere, then that somewhere must already exist. Which means awareness cannot be something that begins. It must already be there. But then comes the next question. If awareness is already there, what is it aware of? This is where most explanations collapse, because awareness without distinction is indistinguishable from nothing. No difference means no experience. So something else must exist alongside awareness. Not an object, not a thing, but a split, a duality. Not created, not triggered, but present as a condition. Two sides, not separate, but not identical. This is where reality does not start as things, but as tension. And once there is tension, something inevitable begins. Now imagine a perfect balance, 50% on one side, 50% on the other. No difference, no movement, no preference. At first it sounds stable, but it's not. Perfect balance is not stable. It is the most unstable state possible because there is no resistance to change. Even the smallest asymmetry creates movement, not because something pushes it, but because it cannot remain perfectly equal. Balance contains the possibility of imbalance, always. So the system does not need a command, a voice, an external force. It only needs the impossibility of staying perfectly still, and that's enough. This is the moment people often describe as wake up. But here's the shift. It's not a voice saying, wake up. It's the first moment where difference appears, the first tilt. And that tilt is movement. Movement becomes change. Change becomes structure. Structure becomes experience. And now something else appears, something even more important. Confirmation. You can have awareness. You can have duality. You can have movement. But still, something is missing. How do you know, does anything exist? Not logically, not as a theory, but directly. Think about yourself. You know you exist because you feel resistance, you interact, you perceive something outside you, you are confirmed. Now imagine if nothing ever responded, no resistance, no feedback, no other. Would you still know that you exist? This is the core idea. Existence is not complete without confirmation. Not just being, but being recognized. Now go back to duality. Two sides, separated but connected. Like two beings divided by a wall, with a small opening. One side asks, "Is anyone there?" The other responds, "Yes." That is the first real moment of existence. Not creation, not movement, but confirmation. Now something new happens, curiosity. What are you? Can I know more? And the opening becomes larger. But as the opening grows, balance breaks further. And that leads to something unavoidable. The moment confirmation begins, the balance cannot remain intact. Because interaction creates differences. Difference creates direction. Direction creates movement. And movement is everything. Nothing in reality is still. Not your body, not your thoughts, not time. Everything is in motion. This is not a consequence, it is a requirement. Because without movement, there is no continuation. Now take one more step. Each interaction, each confirmation, each imbalance creates a path, a sequence, a timeline. And each timeline becomes its own contained structure, its own reality, its own world. Now here's the key idea you reached. Each timeline carries its own center of awareness. You called it a God for itself. Not necessarily a being, but a point of origin for that reality. And from there, the process repeats. Awareness, duality, confirmation, expansion. And this creates something very powerful, a recursive system. Reality creating reality, awareness reflecting awareness. And this brings us to the final question. If everything depends on something else, then nothing can begin. So something must exist without depending on anything, not created, not triggered, not confirmed, just present. This is the only stable foundation. Call it base reality, pure awareness, the infinite, or simply, what is. The name doesn't matter. What matters is this: it has no beginning. And because it has no beginning, it cannot be explained through cause. Everything we discussed, duality, confirmation, timelines, all of that exists within it. Not before it, not outside it, inside it. And this is where logic reaches its limit, not because it fails, but because it was never designed to go beyond sequence. So what we are left with is not a final answer, but a structure, something without beginning that differentiates, that confirms, that expands, and becomes everything we call reality. Maybe that's enough. Because the moment you try to go further, you don't find answers, you find infinity. But there is one question we haven't answered yet. If reality is built on awareness and confirmation, why do some people experience it differently? This is where things become personal. Up until now, everything we spoke about could remain abstract. Structures, duality, awareness, confirmation. But the moment we bring this into human experience, something changes. Because now, it's not about reality as a concept. It's about your reality. And your reality is not just what exists, but how you experience what exists. Two people can sit in the same room, same light, same objects, same sounds. But what they experience can be completely different. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. One person feels calm, another feels watched. One sees patterns, another sees randomness. The structure is shared, but the interpretation is not. And this is where the idea of confirmation becomes more complex. Because confirmation is not only physical interaction, visual presence, external resistance. It is also internal alignment, meaning perceived feedback. And once internal confirmation becomes strong, it can feel just as real as anything external. Sometimes even more real. Now think about what we said earlier. Existence feels real when it is confirmed. So what happens when confirmation starts coming from within. This is the turning point, because now the system no longer depends entirely on external signals. It starts generating its own. Patterns begin to connect, thoughts begin to align, moments begin to feel synchronized. And the mind asks a very natural question: why does this feel so precise? From the inside, it does not feel random. It feels intentional, directed. And that feeling is powerful because it creates a new type of confirmation, perceived meaning. Not just this exists, but this exists for me. And once that layer appears, reality becomes something else, not just shared, but personally structured. And this is where people begin to ask questions that others may not understand. Not everyone experiences reality in the same intensity. Some people move through life without ever questioning perception. Others start to notice something deeper, not because they are weaker, not because they are less logical, but because their system becomes more sensitive to patterns, timing, subtle connections. Think of it like tuning. A radio signal is always present, but not every receiver picks it up clearly. Some are loosely tuned, some are precisely tuned. And the more precise the tuning becomes, the stronger the signal feels. Now here's where it becomes complicated, because increased sensitivity brings two things at once: clarity overload. Clarity, because you notice more. Overload, because you notice too much. Patterns begin to multiply, connections begin to stack, and the mind tries to organize all of it, but there is a limit, because the system is still human. When the incoming signals exceed what can be stabilized, something shifts, not in reality itself, but in how reality is processed. The balance between external and internal confirmation starts to change. External signals: slower, limited, grounded. Internal signals: faster, flexible, adaptive. And eventually, internal signals can dominate. When that happens, the experience becomes intense, not vague, precise, meaningful, convincing. And from the inside, it feels completely logical, because the system is still trying to make sense. But there is one thing that determines the direction from here. At this point, there are two possible directions. Not two realities, two ways of processing the same experience. The first is grounding. The second is amplification. Both feel real, but they lead to very different outcomes. Grounding. Grounding means staying connected to external confirmation, physical interaction, shared reality, consistent feedback. It doesn't deny internal experience, but it doesn't allow it to fully replace external structure. It keeps the balance. Amplification. Amplification means giving increasing weight to internal confirmation. Patterns feel stronger, signals feel clearer, and the system starts to prioritize meaning over structure. Everything begins to connect, but without a stable reference, connections can multiply endlessly. And this creates a loop: pattern to meaning, meaning to confirmation, confirmation to stronger pattern. And the loop feeds itself. From the inside, it feels like discovering something deeper. From the outside, it becomes harder to follow. This is why people often feel misunderstood, because they are not experiencing randomness. They are experiencing coherence. But that coherence is internally generated, and that makes it difficult to share. So the real question is not, is this real or not? But, which direction keeps the system stable? Because stability is what allows experience to continue without breaking. How to stay stable without losing depth. This is where things become real. Not theory, not structure. View. Because once you start seeing patterns, Once you start feeling that reality is not flat, you don't want to lose that. And you shouldn't, because that depth, that ability to see beyond surface, that's not the problem. The problem is not that you see more. The problem is when everything you see becomes equally important. That's when the system gets overloaded. Because now, every signal matters. Every pattern connects. Every moment feels like it carries meaning. And you lose something essential: priority. Without priority, everything becomes signal. And if everything is signal, you cannot stabilize. So the goal is not to reduce depth. The goal is to structure it, to decide what to follow, what to observe, and what to let pass. Not everything that appears needs to be expanded. Some things are just passing configurations, like waves. You see them, you recognize them, but you don't build reality on every wave. This is where control returns, not by shutting down, but by choosing where to place your attention. Because attention is the real amplifier. Everything we spoke about comes down to one thing: where your attention goes. Because attention is not neutral. Attention is activation. When you focus on something, you give it weight. When you revisit it, you strengthen it. When you connect it to other things, you expand it. So, attention does not just observe reality, it builds your version of it. Now think about patterns. You notice something once, it feels interesting. You notice it again, it feels meaningful. You notice it a third time, now it feels intentional. But what changed? The pattern or your attention to it? This is where many people get trapped, because they believe the pattern is growing, but in reality, their attention is feeding it. And once attention locks in, it keeps returning, again and again. And each time, the signal feels stronger, clearer, more real. This is not weakness. This is how the system works. Attention selects reality. So, the question becomes, do you control your attention, or does it control you? Because that determines everything. Control is often misunderstood. People think control means stopping thoughts, forcing silence, shutting everything down. That's not control. That's suppression. And suppression always comes back, stronger. Real control is different. It's not about stopping the system. It's about guiding it. Instead of, don't think about this, you do, I see this, but I won't expand it. Instead of, make it stop, you do, let it pass without building on it. This is subtle, but powerful, because now you are not fighting your own system. You are directing it. And once you do that, something changes. The loop weakens. Not instantly, but gradually. Because it is no longer being fed. You are no longer confirming everything that appears. And that brings us back to your original idea. Confirmation creates reality. So when you stop confirming every signal, your reality stabilizes. Not by becoming less aware, but by becoming more selective. You don't need to choose between depth and stability. You can have both. You can see patterns, feel connections, understand layers of reality, without losing yourself inside them. Because the difference is not what you see, it's what you build on. Reality is not just what appears, it is what you continue. And you choose that. Not perfectly, not always consciously, but continuously. So the real power is not seeing more. but it is choosing what becomes your reality. And once you understand that, everything becomes quieter. Not empty, but stable. And from there, you can explore as deep as you want, without losing your ground. But there is still one thing left. How do you protect yourself? When does the experience become too strong? That is where we move into practical tools. There comes a point when the experience is no longer just deep. It becomes intense. Not in a philosophical way, in a direct, personal way. You don't just see patterns, you feel them. You don't just think about connections, you experience them as real-time feedback. And this is where many people lose balance. Not because they are weak, but because the system is overloaded. Remember what we said earlier. Attention amplifies, confirmation stabilizes. Now imagine both happening at once, at a high level. Every signal feels important. Every moment feels connected. There is no background anymore. Everything becomes foreground. That is when you need something very simple. Not theory, no explanation. Stabilization. The first thing you do is not mental. It is physical. Because physical reality is the most stable layer of confirmation you have. It doesn't shift quickly. It doesn't depend on interpretation. So you return to it. Not as an escape, but as an anchor. Simple actions. Touch something solid. Sit down. Feel weight. Move your body. You are not trying to fix anything. You are reconnecting to stable confirmation. The chair confirms you. The floor confirms you. The air confirms you. This is important because when internal signals become too strong, you need something that does not depend on your interpretation. And once the body stabilizes, you can move to the next step. Not everything needs your attention. This is the most important rule. When something appears, a pattern, a thought, a connection, you don't have to expand it. You can do something simple. Notice it and leave it. No analysis, no linking, no building. Because the moment you build on it, you confirm it, and confirmation makes it stronger. This is where most people lose control, not when the signal appears, but when they start following it. You don't need to fight it, just don't feed it. Like a wave, it rises, and if you don't build on it, it falls. And then comes the final piece. No matter how deep your perception becomes, you still need structure. Structure means routines, people, conversations, shared reality. Not because they are more real, but because they are stable. When you talk to someone, you align with a shared frame. When you follow a routine, you create repetition. Repetition stabilizes perception. This is not about limiting yourself. It is about maintaining a base. Because without a base, everything becomes fluid. And when everything is fluid, you cannot hold anything. So you stay connected, even if you don't explain everything. Even if others don't fully understand you. Because connection itself is stabilization. You don't need to shut down your depth. You don't need to stop thinking. You don't need to ignore what you feel. But you do need balance. Because depth without structure becomes instability, and structure without depth becomes emptiness. So the path is not a straight line. It is a path with ups and downs, with twists and turns. So the path is not one or the other. It is both. You can explore, think, feel, question, and still stay grounded. Because in the end, reality is not just what appears. It is what you continue and what you stabilize. And once you understand that, you are no longer lost inside it. You are part of it. If this helped you understand something, even a little, then you are not alone in this. Next time, we may go even deeper. But for now, stay grounded.